Welcome back to the Industrial Transformation Podcast. Once again, I am Jeremy Frank of KCF Technologies, and I am very pleased today to be joined by Sherri McCleary. Sherri McCleary will be covering some of the really interesting aspects of her career. She has a 30-year career with experience in the manufacturing sector, and most of that time in the metals manufacturing industry, which is one I've gotten to know a lot about recently. And specifically, Sherri's focus has been on deploying new processes and products. And after seeing firsthand the challenges of deploying successful smart manufacturing initiatives, she's taken her passion for bringing digital improvements to the industrial world to help create the Digital Foundry. Digital Foundry was created in partnership with Penn State University to help manufacturers remain current and competitive. And as executive director, Sherri and the soon to be open Digital Foundry aim to be a resource to upskill workers and provide companies with the resources and education, not just to tackle technology implementation, but to address the challenging cultural impacts that come along with that. So, Sherri, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for that introduction. And just to mention, you said soon to be open Digital Foundry. We're in. I'm in my office. We moved in June, had our grand opening, and we're still not fully functional. We're still getting some things up and running, but we are in the Digital Foundry, which is very exciting.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. Having not yet been there myself, I look forward to getting there sometime soon.
Yes. We look forward to having you.
Excellent. So we'll be talking a good bit about the Digital Foundry, but I think it would be helpful for the listeners who come from industrial backgrounds, manufacturing backgrounds, just to talk about your career some. You've had a career, as we said, mostly in the metals manufacturing industry. Can you just talk about your trajectory and the roles that you've evolved through that's put you in the position that you're in now?
Okay. So I spent a little over 30 years with Alcoa, who was started as the world's first and largest aluminum company. Then when that company went through some split in the company, I became a part of the part of that was called Arconic. So I finished out my 30 plus years as a employee of Arconic. While I was there, I had actually started there when I was in undergrad as an intern. Continued to work with them as kind of a co-op when I was in grad school, and then joined them full time, where I came up through the technology part of the organization as an engineer, a project manager, eventually managing teams of other engineers. We focused on in the technology part of the organization, all of the company's major markets. So it was a very exciting place to have a broad perspective of major global markets, including aerospace, automotive, defense, some consumer packaging products. So it was always changing and always exciting, and always something new to be introducing to those market segments. And as I came up through the organization, I led our defense team specifically for a while, focused on technology deployments in the air, land, and sea segments of the Department of Defense. And then when I finished my career there, I was the Director of Research and Development, and kind of finished out in that role. When I left Arconic, then I failed at early retirement, and I went on to work for Kennametal for a little over 2 years to help set up a business based on 3D printing of hard materials for some of their major markets.
Can we go back just a little bit? It's on my mind that we had a couple dozen interns at KCF this summer who just finished and did their capstone presentations. And a really close listener might be able to pick up on the fact that we both have roots in southwestern Pennsylvania. Where did you kind of go to school? Where did you come from originally, and how did you end up in an internship that led to this career?
Okay, so I grew up in a very rural part of western Pennsylvania in Clarion County. Went to undergrad school in Erie, Gannon, and then went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. So it was when I came to the Pittsburgh area for my internship with Alcoa that kind of set down my roots here, and southwestern Pennsylvania has been my home ever since.
And did you do the Alcoa internship while you were at Gannon, or was that while you were
Yes,
at
yeah, it
Carnegie?
was between my junior and senior year, and I actually worked on a project, an automotive application for enhancing uh, the use of adhesives in aluminum body structures for the Audi A8, and it led to a publication in a journal, and so it was kind of a big deal for me as a
Hmm.
junior, senior, in undergrad to have that opportunity, and and I was hooked at that point. I ended up coming back, and some of the things that I had worked on as an intern actually led to some additional work that I would continue to build on for many years of my career in the automotive market segment for Alcoa.
Okay. And that's one of the things I definitely want to talk about. Did you, before I do that, the Carnegie Mellon degree, did you go into that right afterwards? Was that business or engineering, or was it
It was chemical engineering with a focus on materials.
okay?
Um,
While working, you didn't leave Alcoa to do that, or was that right after?
yes, well, I was continuing to work with Alcoa as a kind of like a co-op and doing my master's.
Got it.
So
I did something similar. I think that, I mean, there's so many students ask about that. What's the right choice? Should I do an MBA? Should I do a master's
yeah.
degree? Should I do it right now or wait while I'm working? And there's pros
So
and
I mean,
cons.
I do have opinion about the MBA because I did go on take a lot of MBA type classes, a lot of executive level training throughout the years, and I personally, going back and doing that after I had some years of experience, thought I'm not sure of how much I would have been able to connect the dots and gain a strong understanding in some of the MBA classes if I hadn't had some experience
Mm.
in business already. So I'm a proponent of get your good technical roots and foundation because those will never go away. But some of the business type of classes and degrees, I think, are more beneficial when you have some context,
Mm. That's
right? Because
interesting
those are not as kind of black and white as some of the technical stuff.
for sure. Right, because
Yeah,
it's contextual and applied.
right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's interesting. I did an MBA as an entrepreneur. We were 3 years into the company, and I had a PhD mechanical engineering as my technical roots, and was realizing that I could benefit from some of that additional context in business. And that so I did it during that time, and I think it was really helpful for me as well at that point because I basically
Mhm.
used all of the curriculum, all the classes and projects were almost consulting projects for our fledgling company. So
Yeah, right,
it
right.
was
The
good.
other thing, I took some advanced classes in um, uh, law, in contract law and intellectual property management, because again, especially if you're working in a technical field, you don't realize as a young engineer or as a student how much those kind of things are going to be a part of what you do.
Okay. So that's a natural transition to something that we touched on when we visited each other not too long ago. You touched on building products, and I assume most people are familiar with Alcoa, but between Alcoa and the now Arconic and Howmet, dominant provider of aluminum and aluminum materials and also finished products globally.
Right.
And is that a reasonable summary?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they always said when it was still Alcoa, always kind of one under one umbrella, from dirt to product, because they owned everything from the mining of the bauxite that you extract the ore from to finished products that go out into the markets.
Okay.
It was a great kind of getting that whole supply chain perspective, being part of a company like that.
Got it. And there's we might come back to some topics on that, but I wanted to start with at the end, the finished product, because you were involved in something that was a really interesting part of I think American, really global manufacturing history, which is the big auto companies starting to use Alcoa's aluminum in body construction. Can you walk us through? And it touches on some of the intellectual property things you maybe alluded to.
Yeah.
Can you take us through
Yeah.
just some of some of what you can share from that part of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So, uh, the automotive industry had been, the automotive industry had been using aluminum going all the way back to the Ford Model T. And that aluminum was provided by Alcoa, a cast right here in New Kensington, a couple blocks from where I'm sitting right now. So, aluminum was always in automotive because of its cost and its difference in the way it has to be handled in the manufacturing environment. Did not make its way into really high volume production. For many years, it was showing up in lower volume luxury cars and high performance, like the Ferraris. We were all over the Ferraris because of performance demands. But Ford Motor Company made a decision that was a very bold decision that they would go in the early 2000s towards aluminum body structures for their F-150, which was and still is the highest volume production vehicle in the world. So that was a very bold decision, driven by Alan Mulally, who was their CEO at the time. And he came out of Boeing in the aerospace industry and was kind of like, we've been using aluminum on airplanes for a century. Why aren't we using more of it here? So I had been involved in developing a technology actually several years prior to Ford making that decision, that was really an enabler to allowing them to use structural adhesive bonding with a very robust performance of that product. And when I said it, this kind of goes all the way back to some of the work I did in my internship. Years later, we were working on how do we make those processes more robust and reliable and able to survive crash performance and many years in the field. So it was really an engineering modification of the surface of the aluminum that allowed this. So Ford had been working with us on that product, had done a lot of testing. We had done testing with automotive major OEMs all over the world on that product, and they all loved it, and it outperformed other things in the market. But nobody was taking the leap to do it in high volume. So when Ford made the decision they were going to go all aluminum on the F-150 body, they said, we need the best performance we can get out of every aspect of that body design. We're taking a lot of risk, so we got to minimize our risk by making sure we're using the highest performing products we can affordably put into this vehicle. So they came to us, said, we'd love to have this product, but there were a few issues. One was when they were jumping all in with this high volume, it required a lot of capacity investment for us. And even with capacity investments, the volume was much higher than what Alcoa alone could provide. So we had to work out a deal to make that available and licensed to our major competitors.
How was that for you? I mean, playing that, convincing your leadership to provide
that
your
was
core technology.
that's a challenge. Like when you live in a world where it's always been about how do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors and how do we protect that differentiation in our intellectual property. Now you're asking them to take something that you've just been told is a valuable asset to this major decision your customer has made, and you're asking your leadership to license this to your biggest competitors. So that I got to really use a lot of that learnings over the years around managing intellectual property, managing licensing agreements, establishing market value for technology, which is, again, a huge part of what you do when you're promoting new technologies and trying to get them in the field. So I've often told people the technology is most often the easy part. It's then how do you get it to market? How do you work through these kind of details? But we were able to work out some agreements with our competitors that allowed, and it was really the right thing to do for the market, because this opened up a huge opportunity for aluminum in the automotive industry, for automotive companies to kind of look a little bit more closely at what's the art of the possible with using lightweight materials and new approaches to body design. So it really was a game changer for the aluminum industry and to some extent for the automotive industry, which there were a lot of people who took a lot of risk. But it's still out there, still selling a lot of them today, still the highest volume vehicle in the world, and was very proud to be a part of making that a reality.
Fantastic. It's interesting. I have a follow-on question to that. One of the books probably behind me is this is our little recording studio at the office, but we have some of the books that are really the prized ones that we read here at KCF, and American Icon is one of those books, and it tells the story of
I
when
was
Alan
going to say,
Mulally came
I
to
know
Ford.
what you're going to say.
Yeah, and
One of my favorite like business books that I've ever read, because I was, even prior to reading that book, a big fan of Alan Mulally's, of his style, of his guts, while still being a very personable and dynamic leader. So somebody that I admire very much. And that's a fantastic book, not only about him as a leader, but about really, saving Ford Motor Company when they were in sort of dire straits. So yeah, that was a great read.
and that's one of the things I wanted to ask. Is it so? In addition to saving Ford Motor Company, when this is in the fallout of the financial crisis of 2008, and that's what the book's really. They don't talk about the going to a aluminum body on the F-150. They don't go to the level
They
of
might have
detail.
mentioned it at one point,
They did.
but yeah, at a point when he's trying to save the company from total demise, he was also taking a major risk, calculated but major risk still, to introduce something that was radically different in the industry.
And this was then a few years later, probably when the core of that work was happening in 2010, 11, 12, something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
It's 14 all the way up to like 2014.
okay, so here we are, almost 10 years later. From when you were doing the work. Couple questions. I'm curious, how did it go? This industrial transformation podcast is mostly about technology and Industry 4.0, but this switching to lightweight materials in vehicles is a pretty transformative thing. If you reflect on that 10 years on, how much of an impact did that have? Like, do you think it was the right decision? And are there quantifiable things you can look back at and say other companies followed suit, or they've struggled?
Yeah, I mean, other companies did follow suit. I think and I think that we're entering a time with respect to just the evolution of the auto industry towards more electric vehicles, that lightweighting is going to become even more crucial. So the energy efficiency that it drives when you can cut your body weight to almost 50%, there's a huge, very tangible impact on um, fuel economy, but also on a lot of other performance in everything from braking systems to handling to actually crash energy can be managed well with some of the lighter weight materials. So, um, and that doesn't mean that it's going to replace steel, or there's a lot of new next generation steels and other materials, but it opens up that, which kind of gets to what we were talking about using technology to solve a problem. Technology, material options, whatever that technology may be, is as a tool in your toolbox. And as an engineer, the more we can add tools to our toolbox, the more things we can do. So I think making that a reality, put a new tool in the engineers and designers toolbox, that this is something that's very viable. There's a lot of data to back this up, and now how do we take it to the next level, and improve on it and add to it. And technology and innovation is always a very iterative process. So I think that as I look back on it, it's very impactful, because I think it changed the trajectory to some extent on what the material options are for mass produced vehicles, and also even for those that aren't mass produced, for those that require demand lighter weight for energy reasons and fuel economy reasons.
Got it. Yeah, one thing that's on my mind when I think about that story, because we were working with Alcoa already a little bit at that time, and I was aware of this happening without it was only recently that we connected with each other, but we were working with other parts of the company at the time. And what I remember, the thing that I think even I think most manufacturing experts, certainly in the auto industry, this was a memorable thing. Seeing this change was a big deal. It was transformative. But the competitive environment, and I'd rather not mention who. Actually, I don't recall exactly who, but I distinctly remember what I think everyone would recall is there were competitive commercials on TV showing big piles of bricks dropping and cracking the aluminum because the aluminum is lightweight and not able to stand up to the rigors of the field. So without talking about which company it was, how did that strike you from having been at the forefront of the advantages that come along with the technology? Did you think that was interesting? Did those other companies follow suit, or are they still kind of battling that out?
Well, yeah, most of them had already been doing this to some extent, and not on the scale Ford was, but they were all using aluminum, had been using aluminum in body panels for decades.
Yeah.
And if you understand anything about the engineering of body structure, those just were so the weight has nothing to do with it. That's and the dent resistance is governed by things like yield strength, your kind of thickness and stiffness and moment of inertia in your design. There's all these other things that play and they have nothing to do with the fact that it's lightweight. And it's not like you're making it out of the same alloy that you make a beer can out of. These are, high strength, heat treated alloys that, we were putting them into military vehicles. We were designing some of those alloys specifically to provide blast and ballistic protection in armored vehicles. So that, which was part of the kind of the Ford campaign, was around introducing aluminum as being military grade. There's so many alloys that are designed specifically to take those very tough environments. So there was a part of me that was immediately like, what, are you kidding me? And then a part of me that was like, okay, well, they just aren't understanding that from an engineering and a materials perspective, what they're showing is not valid.
Yeah.
There's so many ways around designing around the kind of thing that they were showing, and guarantee you that their competitor Ford was very cautious in making sure that they were not putting. This was their flagship vehicle. You want to make sure you do things right.
Yeah. So suffice it to say, you noticed that also and found it amusing. Yeah, I mean, maybe my takeaway would be: don't believe everything you see on TV, because it's not a technical presentation. It's meant to advertise right. vehicles. So no harm in that sense. But also, it is, I think, one of the things we talk about here. Another book on our shelf is Factfulness. That to make educated, informed decisions as engineers when you're making really important choices, you have to go look at all those factors and actually get the right answer, because it,
right.
Obviously
right.
in this case,
absolutely,
that had happened, and I thought it was interesting. Well, so you touched on it a little bit, and that's the next topic I'd like to go into is this idea of solving a real business problem, and I think we can transition and talk a little bit about the aluminum body thing, but primarily on this podcast we talk about technology, and specifically the buzzwords encompassed by Industry 4.0 and Industrial Internet of Things. And I know from our discussions that you've seen a lot of those kinds of things also deployed throughout your
right.
Alcoa and Arconic and Howmet career. So can you just talk about what drives that focus for you? So solving a real business problem is the way I think you articulated it, rather than just building technology for technology's sake, or companies feeling like they have to keep up with other technology, other companies in adopting technology, but to really solve a business problem. What does that
right.
mean to you?
So, and I think that's where, for me, tend to be a little more of a strategic thinker. So I love that, connecting the dots on what's the problem you're trying to solve, what technologies are out there that can help you, and then how do you connect the right people to make that become a reality. So it's kind of the problem, the technology, the people, they have to all come together. But that was something that was very ingrained in me being in a technology focused organization for so many years. Is you don't go out and start spending money until you know what it is that you hope to deliver. So you have to define what is the business value. Can you do it in such a way that someone's going to pay you for that? Can you return enough on your investment to make that worthwhile? And what, uh, but it starts before you even get to any of those dollars and cents is what's the problem that someone else isn't solving that you think you can? Um, because if you don't know that, then nobody's going to pay you to do it. You're not going to know what a good return is, and you're never going to make a business case to go out and develop the technology in the first place. So I think sometimes it's backwards, where people come up with an invention or a solution or technology, and then they try to go out and find a hole to plug, versus saying, well, where's there already a hole that somebody hasn't plugged, and then how do I go about filling that? So um, to me, that seems like the logical approach. And sometimes you stumble on an invention or a technology that you don't have a home for yet. Like the old story of the 3M Post-it notes, right? uh, but um, but I think more often than not, the right approach is to figure out what's a problem in the world and how do I use technology to solve that.
Yeah. Yeah. When I talk to aspiring entrepreneurs, that's usually my story for them as well, is start with a problem. I mean, in the idea of starting a company is kind of the extreme. Anybody
Right.
that goes into it starting with an idea, first of all, I don't think that happens very often. And second of all, it doesn't happen successfully. It's even
Right.
less frequent. But if you
Right.
start with a real motivating problem, and I've heard lots of smart people talk about it that way subsequently, I think it matches. What can you think? Well, first of all, so within your Alcoa and our Arconic experiences, is this something that organization does particularly well in your, or were you kind of an outlier within the organization, or a
No,
little bit of both?
I think that they did, and I think that I think a good successful team has a diverse mix of people from the perspective of not just that we look different on the outside, but that we think differently. So you need those people who are going to be the very deep analytical thinkers who are not necessarily up here looking at the big picture and the business value, but you better team them with somebody who is up here looking at the big picture and the business value and how to use that technology as a tool. Um, because it's often not the same people that do both ends of that spectrum well. So I think that what my experience on in that organization over the years was that they had a nice mix of people who had perspectives at kind of both ends of that spectrum, and a lot of talent to bring those ideas to a reality. Um, and I think that you mentioned about how I kind of transitioned to this role and this industry 4.0 kind of stuff. And that was not my area of expertise. As I said, I was a materials person. I was very much on the product side of the business. A lot of this industry 4.0 and the smart manufacturing and automation was on the process side of our business. But I think that what I brought was, again, that perspective of being able to look at the technology that our experts in that area were developing and deploying, and understand what's the value it's bringing, where can we plug it in the business to maximize that value, how do we replicate it across other areas of the business. So it was bringing that kind of strategic map making
Hmm.
together with the people who were the real deep technical experts that allowed us to develop some of those technologies, deploy some of those technologies, and then replicate it across the organization for the biggest impact.
Hmm. So that again is a really nice transition to the third big thing that I want to cover with you in the time that we have, is the Digital Foundry. And in one sense, the idea is having a problem, which is, well, I'd like for you to state the problem that we're tackling there, that you're tackling. And I mean, the scope of it in one sense is, enhanced manufacturing capability across the entire nation, or even, broader than that, really broader than that. So can you talk about that? So with the Digital Foundry at Penn State, but really not at Penn State. I mean, in New Kensington, and really an industrial hub. Can you just tell us about the vision of the Digital Foundry and what you're really passionate about in moving forward, the problem you're solving?
Yeah, absolutely. So this started out of a conversation with the chancellor of the Penn State New Kensington campus here when I was still with Alcoa and Arconic. We had a long-standing partnership with the local Penn State campus, and they were looking at how they differentiated themselves. And I started talking with him about this whole Industry 4.0 movement, and how we were, even as a large organization with a lot of talent and resources at our disposal, we were, challenged with how to bring more of this digital technology into our operations. Where do you start? How do you make the business case for it? How do you deploy it and grow it kind of in an incremental fashion? How do you get the team on board? Because there's always a whole kind of cultural element when you bring in new processes and new technologies. So I said, as I look at that in the context of a couple of things, one is, are we preparing our students to be ready to move into that new demands on the workforce? And second, being in a large organization with a lot of assets at your disposal and still seeing how challenging this could be, where do you ever start as a small business to figure out how you take that step, what technology is right for you, how to even get started moving down that path? But you might need to do it to stay competitive, but you're not sure where to start. So I said, I think if you want to be looking at a way to differentiate yourself and also hopefully help our region, how do we develop what I called at the time a kind of a digital makerspace to help with current and future workforce skills, as well as keeping local manufacturers current and having access and visibility to those technologies, particularly the small to medium-sized businesses. So that was kind of the genesis of the idea. And when I had the opportunity to, I was asked if I wanted to apply for the position of being the executive director when this kind of got off the ground and was funded. I didn't really have to think about it too hard, because I knew that I had reached a point in my life where it becomes more about what are you giving back? What's your legacy going to be? Not what's your accomplishments, what's your legacy? And so I thought this is a great opportunity to use my years of experience, my understanding of technology, my network of connections in industry, to give back in a very pragmatic way to the local communities and economy. When you look at what led to the kind of the demise of New Kensington where we sit, it was industries like Alcoa that started here pulling out. It's the classic Rust Belt story, right? So when manufacturing and industry leaves, everything else goes with it. Nothing has the multiplication effect that manufacturing does. So how do you do the inverse of that and start to make manufacturing healthier, so that in return you make the economy healthier, you make the local Main Street businesses healthier, you provide more opportunities for the community members. So that was kind of the genesis of the idea, and why I personally looked at this as a great final chapter in my career, I think.
So, and it's interesting times, of course, because here we are now 2 years in, 2.5 years almost into when the whole pandemic began and put a major shock into some of the very things that you're addressing. And now we have not only all these supply chain issues that make it all the more difficult for all manufacturers, but probably especially smaller ones, to keep up. And we have a workforce shortage that's projected to get substantially worse, and the great retirement that's in process. All these things are creating additional pain and challenge around this very problem that you're tackling.
Right.
I,
Right.
I'm curious now that you're actually, so you've opened in June, and how are you feeling about, if you look 5-10 years down the road, are you feeling pretty confident about the ability to make a real impact on these very, very, very real problems that I think most people underestimate? Are you feeling like you can make a difference, and especially how? Where are those things going to come?
So we're approaching this as kind of three primary areas of service we want to provide. The first is education and training, and that includes everything from we're working with local K through 12 school districts through programs that Penn State, New Kensington already had with some of those local school districts. We are working with the university. And then our workforce training, which we've already developed some really great curriculum that goes all the way from entry level, like somebody entering the manufacturing field on the plant floor, to engineering level training in these kinds of Industry 4.0 technologies. So that's number one. How do you keep the future and current workforce moving in the right direction, having the right skill sets? That's one area we're focused on. The other one is you also have to keep the employers healthy. We have over 5,000 manufacturing companies within 40 miles or so of us here, and 98+% of those are classified as small businesses. So they are truly the backbone of the economy. And then that's not unique to here, that's everywhere. So, how do you keep those employers competitive, thriving, access to technologies that will keep them current? And then the third piece is kind of just being a resource where we can bring in guest speakers and live demonstrations and almost like small trade shows so that people don't have to travel to find access and visibility into some of these latest technologies. So you ask, looking forward, where do we see the opportunities for success? I mean, I think that we really got to get the workforce trained, and we've got to get the manufacturing companies realizing where they can start to take steps to enhance their productivity, their quality, their efficiency, their energy consumption, all of those kind of things. And the challenge is getting people in this time when you said, they've got all these other strains on the system. The problem right now, I think, is getting people to look up from all those problems long enough to realize that status quo isn't going to get you there. And so I think the challenge we face in the next few years is convincing both on an individual employee or future employee level and on a business level that this is not something you can wait to think about. So that's, I think, what the biggest challenge will be in this environment. But I also think there's tremendous opportunity because so many of these things have become more visible. And I think there's a realization that technology can help solve a lot of the talent issues. Technology can help solve a lot of the supply chain issues. And if you bring manufacturing back onshore that was offshore decades ago, it's not going to come back the same way it left. It's going to come back being done with a very different level of technology and automation and digital processes. So I am very optimistic that we're going to have a positive impact, but I'm not blind to the fact that it's going to be a challenge.
Sure.
But I'm ready to take that on.
I'm glad you are, and you're just incredibly experienced and well positioned to be able to have a big impact. As we've talked about, I've interfaced with quite a few different organizations that have been supported by or come from government initiatives. And without a leader like you in place, I've seen a lot of them very much struggle because these aren't areas where bureaucratic solutions are typically the path forward. It takes hard work, creativity, connecting dots, all the things you touched on. Can you just one last topic, and then we're getting close to running out of time. But can you talk about the national context for this, kind of the fact that you are supported with funding from I believe the Department of Energy, but then also the SESME Smart Manufacturing Institute?
Right. Yeah, sure. So we've been in our kind of the last year of kind of getting ourselves ready to launch. We've been very successful in securing some government funding. We're funded primarily by a private foundation, here in Pittsburgh. But um, we also receive funding from the Department of Labor for some of our workforce training development from the Pennsylvania DCED for workforce training development. And we were also named through funding from the Department of Energy as one of SESME's Smart Manufacturing Innovation Centers. There are 7, I believe, across the country, and we were just named as one of their newest. So we're very proud to be a part of that. And it's very well aligned. And I have to say this because I always use this in every conversation. Our vision at the Digital Foundry is to improve lives and strengthen businesses through access to digital technologies. And that's well aligned with SESME's initiatives, which are really to what they call democratize smart digital manufacturing technologies to make it more accessible. So our missions and our visions are well aligned, and it brings us access to a national network of other innovation centers, of technology platforms that they're creating through funding from the Department of Energy, and the goal is that it will help to accelerate the access and deployment of some of these technologies, particularly for smaller businesses.
Yeah, I'm smiling just because the alignment of your vision and the SESME national vision also aligns with where our company came from, at least in the what we currently do. Our whole Industry 4.0 capability came out of a program while you were in the early part of your Alcoa career. I was just getting our company off the ground, and this is in the early 2000s. They had a program, the Department of Energy. It was at the time called the Industrial Technologies Program, but it was called Industrial Wireless Technology for the 21st Century, kind of pre-Industry 4.0, pre-IoT. Yeah. And right. we were funded along with some of the big companies, but we were one of the small innovative ones. And there are areas where the government funds the right thing, and it takes time to percolate. But our mandate from the government is basically the same thing: to bring those technologies in, but actually solve a real problem and get the workforce adapted and motivated to take advantage of it. So we're certainly aligned in that regard.
Right, absolutely. And I think, this space has just in the last few years become more crowded, but there's so much work to do that I don't look at that as a problem or a threat. I look at that as, we've got to all be pulling in the same direction, because there's a bigger picture here than just one business's competitive advantage. This is about providing a future that's strong and bright and position us well as an economy.
No doubt. I mean, I might just, the one topic, the number that we talk about a lot, when the DOE set out to tackle this problem 20 years ago, they quantified $2.5 trillion of annual waste. So, just one way to quantify the problem that largely today, 20 years later, remains mostly unsolved, because it's a difficult problem deploying technology to eliminate waste and machine failures and so forth. And that's a massive chunk of the GDP of our country, obviously. And it's real. From everything I've seen, it's very real. And so I share your point of view that it's not about competitiveness. It's about, can you actually solve a problem or not, where others have tried and failed. So
yeah.
So I look forward to many opportunities to collaborate.
At the end of the day, businesses have to make money, and people are going to get paid when businesses make money. But there's those grander challenges that hopefully drive a little bit more of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Absolutely. Well, I certainly feel well aligned, and I especially really appreciate having the chance to talk with you today, Sherri. This is wonderful. We look forward to future collaborations, especially that we're both kind of part of the Penn State network, and here in Pennsylvania, where our part of the Rust Belt, I think, is certainly not that rusty, and it's going to get less and less rusty as we continue to do these things. Anything you'd like to share just in closing?
Well, I just want to say I've gotten to know a little bit about your business recently, and I am impressed and excited about working with you. I think you're a great example of exactly the kind of thing we were just talking about. Like, how do you find accessible, affordable ways for this technology to create better opportunities for businesses and for their employees? So I'm excited about that, and as I'm excited about being I say, look at where we sit here in southwestern Pennsylvania, literally changed the course of history in the first and second industrial revolution. And I hope we're positioned to do it again in the fourth. I think we are. There's a lot of great kind of tech economy that's being created here. And so we want to be a part of making that a reality for not a few, but for many.
And let's end on that. I can't say it any better than you can. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Sherri, for being here as a guest on the Industrial Transformation Podcast. Once again, I'm Jeremy Frank, and this has been Sherri McCleary of the Digital Foundry.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.